Here Jayadev wrote Gita Govinda. One day, while working on Gita Govinda, Jayadev felt inspired to write, Krishna bows down to touch the lotus feet of Srimati Radharani. Jayadev was hesitant to say something that might diminish Lord Krishna's position as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He went to refresh himself with a Ganges bath before honouring Radha Madhava Mahaprasadam. In his absence, Krishna himself, disguised as Jayadev, came to the house of the poet. He wrote a line in the Gita Govinda, Dehi Pada Palavam Udaram, and accepted prasadam from Padmavati. Upon returning, Jayadev was astonished to see the line. Understanding the mystery, Jayadev cried in spiritual joy and said, Padmavati, we are most fortunate. Shri Krishna himself has written the line, Dehi Pada Palavam Udaram, and taking prasadam from your hand. Gita Govinda expresses the intense feelings of separation that Sri Radhika felt before the Rasa dance. It also describes the most intimate pastimes of Radha Shyama Sundar. During Lord Chaitanya's Gambhira Leela in Jagannath Puri, he would thoroughly relish hearing Gita Govinda, Samdela by Sri Damodar and Mukunda. After finishing Gita Govinda, Jayadev visited Vrindavan and then lived his last in Jagannath Puri. He introduced daily reading of Gita Govinda in the temple of the pleasure of Lord Jagannath. So does anybody know what this line, Dehi Pada Palavam means?
Something to do with touching the feet.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, that the line is mentioned, but didn't get the actual translation afterwards. So I wonder if it is something to do with that line that he was writing. That'd be good if someone could find out. Dehi Pada Palavam Udaram.
How do you spell it?
Huh?
How do you spell it?
Dehi, as in body, Dehi, P-H-H-I, so D-E-H-I, Pada, and Palavam, P-A-L-L-A-V-A-M, and Udaram. So the line that Jayadev wrote was, Krishna bows down to touch the lotus feet of Srimati Radharani. Interesting, because we're just about to continue with the Srimad Bhagavatam in a few minutes, and we're at the point where Maharaj Bharat is leading royal life to live in the forest. Here we see similarly, Jayadev lived as the court pandit of Lakshmana Sena. He lived in royal opulence and he gave it up to live in a grass hut. It shows you how rich in devotion these personalities were, to give it all up.
That means, let your feet adorn my head.
Let your feet adorn my head.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could just by hand write that in there. Perhaps Felix, if you give that to Tochi, he can write it in on that section. We know what it means the next time. In front of the place markers seem to be moved, so I'm just going to read from New Delhi, August 22nd, 1975. At 9:15 in the morning, Srila Prabhupada and several of his leading disciples arrived at the Prime Minister's home, where they were confronted by a formidable security check. 2 days before, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh had been assassinated, and Mrs. Gandhi was rumoured to be next. Armed soldiers therefore surrounded her residence. The guards at the outer gate decided that the foreigners could not go in. Srila Prabhupada alone could enter. While one guard opened the gate, another ushered Srila Prabhupada into a car which carried him to the Prime Minister's front door. Meanwhile, the devotees waited in anxiety by the outer gate. Always some disciples would accompany Prabhupada wherever he went. His disciples worried, almost like doting parents, that he might need their assistance. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So continues that. Interesting, Srila Prabhupada on several occasions made the point that devotees think he's an old man. And he often and demonstrated that he wasn't, that he was never yovam, eternally youthful. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 8, entitled The Character of Bharat Maharaj, Text 15. That is in 15. I'll just read through it myself. Kanyata Visham Vidikya Mana Nashta Dharima Iva Kripana Sakarunam Atitarshena Harina Naka Viraha Vivala Vidaya Smitapas Tam Eva Nishochan Kila Kashmalam Mahad Abiram Vita Itakovacha people who are Kanyadi, sometimes not seeing the calf,
Sometimes not seeing the calf.
Vrisham,
Vrisham,
very much. Hadvidya Mana, his mind full of anxiety. Nasta Dravina, who has lost his riches. Siva, like Kripana, Majalinam, Sakurinam, piteously. Atitarshena, great anxiety. Harina Kunaka, from the calf of the deer. Viraha, by separation. Shivala, agitated. Hridaya, mind or heart. Santapa, whose affliction. Tam, that calf. Eva, only. Anushochan, continuously thinking of. Kila, certainly. Kashmalam, illusion. Mahat, very great. Aviram Gita, obtained. Iti, thus. Settlement. Vacha, translation. If Bharat Maharaj sometimes could not see the deer, his mind would be very agitated. He would become like a miser, who having obtained some riches had lost them, and had then become very unhappy. When the deer was gone, he would be filled with anxiety and would lament due to his separation. Thus he would become illusioned and speak as follows. Let's repeat. If Bharat Maharaj sometimes could not see the deer, his mind would be very agitated. He would become like a miser, who having obtained some riches, had lost them and had then become very unhappy. When the deer was gone, he would be filled with anxiety and would lament due to separation. Thus he would become illusioned and speak as follows. If a poor man loses some money or gold, he at once becomes very agitated. Similarly, the mind of Maharaj Bharat would become agitated when he did not see the deer. This is an example of how our attachment can be transferred. If our attachment is transferred to the Lord's service, we progress. Srila Rupa Goswami prayed to the Lord that he would be as naturally attracted to the Lord's service as young men and young women are naturally attracted to each other. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu exhibited such attachment to the Lord when he jumped into the ocean or cried at night in separation. However, if our attachment is diverted to the material things instead of to the Lord, we will fall down from the spiritual platform. Om Jnana Timirandasya Vyanjana Salakaya Chaturamitam Yana Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Kam Karoti Vachalam Bhagavan Tegaram Yakripa Tamam Vande Shri Guru Dharanam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Gaura Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. If Bharat Maharaj sometimes could not see the deer, his mind would be very agitated. He would become like a miser who, having obtained some riches, had lost them and had then become very unhappy. When the deer was gone, he would be filled with anxiety and would lament due to separation. Thus, he would become delusional and speak as follows. So although Maharaj Bharat was continuing with his worship in the deity, his mind was always thinking of this attachment that had developed, even though he gave up all attachments to family, property, kingdom, empire. Practically the whole planet was in his name. And even by modern standards, nobody has got that. You know, sometimes you see people, they aspire for world domination or something like that. Typically, you should have these James Bond movies where the bad guy would be aspiring for world domination. He was never a good guy, was it? But actually, Bharat Maharaj was the good guy. He was in charge of the planet, and he was seeing that everybody was doing everything nicely, that they were acting according to regulative principles of Varnashram Dharma, everyone was performing the duty, and he took a personal responsibility that if there was dissatisfaction amongst the people, then it was his service to actually deal with that, and therefore he would have pandits, Brahmins who would be advising him, etc. And in the course of his statesmanship, then he would also be worshipping the Lord. He was a great devotee, even as an administrative head of the planet. He was a great devotee of the Lord. And we see that people naturally, Yajad Ajar Kishas Hastatati, Projanahasya, Praman Kuti, Lotus Tadan Vartate. Does anybody know this English to this one? Whatever a great man. Yes, Rothschild.
Whatever actions you don't have opposed to the Father's footsteps.
That's right. That was the abbreviated version. So basically it means that great personalities, people follow in their footsteps, so it becomes their duty to set a good example. If people become very wealthy or famous for something, and then they do something which is out of character, then people, the media will be bringing them down, just like, for example, the royal family. Sometimes they get some good PR, sometimes they get some bad PR. And the bad PR is often showing, it's an indication that the people expect those who are leaders to be of a certain type of behaviour, to set a good standard. It's natural. It's not some kind of thing Krishna imposed when he says whatever actions a great person performs, common people follow in the footsteps. They actually want to follow. The Sudra, most of the people in the society are Sudras, and they feel protected and they feel satisfied when they're actually following. But presently, because there are no good examples to follow, then there's so much dissatisfaction. And then what happens, it becomes so confused that even if someone did set a good standard, they wouldn't recognise it. Just like one time, we were in Edinburgh distributing books, and we had one so-called Christian. I wouldn't say he was a Christian, because if he was a true Christian, then he would have been representing, he would have recognised the qualities in someone else. But the principles which we follow, the four Brahminical principles, which is the four regulative principles, no intoxication, no illicit sex, no gambling, no meat eating, then he severely criticised myself and Hare Krishna movement for propagating these principles, and he said it was an offence against God. But if he was to look at his own book, he would find that that's not the case. So these Brahminical principles, in Kali Yuga, if one tries to propagate Brahminical principles, it's said that in Kali Yuga, religion is seen as irreligion and irreligion is seen as religion. So simply because many people do the wrong thing, it doesn't make it right, it never makes it right. If all of a sudden they decided, okay, it's okay to murder people now, I'm just going to give people the freedom of choice, and it's your karma if you do it, so it's up to you, I'll leave it up to you, and you can just get your karma. Some people say, well, I just don't believe in karma and there's no punishment, so I'll just do what I want. So we can't just leave it to the law of karma, there has to be some laws there to protect society, especially for those who are trying to follow it. So this is typically what the Raj Rishis would do. They would protect the innocent society. It's not that everybody was walking around with a bead bag on their hand. At any time in the material world, there's always the divine and demonic personalities. Krishna says that in Bhagavad Gita, there's always two types of persons. So, therefore, the duty of the head of state is to give protection to all the citizens. And in the first canto, Srimad Bhagavatam, Prabhupada says that this extends to the animals also. It's not just for humans. He says that the head of state is known as Prajapati, the father or the protector or well-wisher of all the living entities who are under his care, not just the human beings. Praja means all living entities. So, in this sense, Prabhupada says that it's the duty of the head of state to make sure that animal slaughter is not going on. And as you were saying not so long ago, Nepal was actually a kingdom, a Hindu kingdom, where it was against the law, I'm not sure if it is now, but it was against the law to kill a cow, and you get 30 years in prison for it. Possibly because the death sentence wasn't there any longer. Actually, in the Bible it says to kill an ox is as to kill a man. I think that was Isaiah 55. So this is something there. There was one devotee, Satyaraj Prabhu, who wrote a book about this, and you'll find in all religious scriptures that same principle is there, that we should respect the kingdom of God by respecting the living entities in it. And this is what Lord Chaitanya was saying, should be ready to offer all respect to others. So the devotee sees that all living entities are parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, and he shows respect to them in different ways. So there's different ways that we relate to different living entities. Can anyone mention one or two of them? Or any, all four? So, for example, those who are envious, we should avoid them. Right? That's one. The innocent should be
befriend the innocent, help the
should show mercy to the innocent. And what others?
Avoid the envious.
Yes, so we avoid two envious people.
Sorry?
That's twice we avoid the envious ones. That's true. So anyway, the point is, although we see all living entities and parcels of Krishna, there has to be some discrimination. This impersonalist oneness thing is not very practical, because if you just walk into a forest and see, well, all the living entities are one, so it doesn't matter. I'll just walk up to this tiger and say, Haribol, would you like some prasadam? And the tiger says yes, and he munches you. You just go, Sarira Vijaya, and bit your head off. So there has to be some discrimination, and this philosophy of Chinti Veda Veda Tattva means that we're simultaneously one with the Supreme Lord and different from him. We're simultaneously one in that we are one in quality, we are of the same spiritual nature, but we're not the same in quantity. So the Supreme Lord is Ajita, he's unconquerable, but we're not Ajita because we can be conquered over by illusion. Krishna is never conquered by illusion. And when we take shelter in Krishna, then we cross over the influence of the ocean of Maya. So there's this, before I joined, I had a friend who was He was quite an intelligent chap, and he was into various philosophies. At least I thought he was intelligent until I found Prabhupada's books, and then I realised actually he was just attached to being a speculator. He wasn't intelligent because he was speaking to me about various philosophers. There's one called Gurdjieff, maybe you've heard of him, Gurdjieff. And his thing was that he was putting forward the idea of reincarnation, but he said that you always go up, you never go back. You always learn something, you go up. But in Bhagavad Gita it doesn't say that. It says that yam yam vapi smarambhavam, whatever you think of at the time of death, that you will attain. So if you degrade yourself, once you engage one's mind to be one's friend, not one enemy, if your mind is left uncontrolled, then your mind is your enemy. Because it degrades you. So one should not degrade oneself by being controlled by the mind, but one should train the mind so that it actually assists us in devotional service. So he couldn't accept that one could go up or down depending on the choices we make and depending on the law of karma. So eternally, not eternally, but since time immemorial, we're going up and down and up and down. Sometimes we're behaving ourselves and we're getting a reward. Sometimes we're being naughty and we get sent to a room, Just like the naughty child gets sent to the room without supper. So we get sent to the womb. Prabhupada gives this nice, sent to the womb of Mother Nature, Maya Devi. Take birth again. You've been breaking the laws again, the laws of karma, laws of nature, breaking the laws, and you have to go and take birth again and get your punishment. But the punishment is not eternal. The punishment fits the crime. So just like in society, many people complain that the punishment often doesn't fit the crime. Sometimes it's too severe for a small thing, and at other times it's not severe enough for something which is heinous activity. And we see there's a great imbalance with that. Sometimes someone may commit some murder and they're out in 7 years, and then someone steals some money and they get 20 years. And it shows you that money is more important than life itself. That shows you what the value of the society has become. Nothing is more important than life itself. So, Bharat Maharaj, although he had advanced in so much knowledge, he once again became distracted. So this shows us that don't become complacent. No matter how much you've done, Bharat Maharaj done stacks more devotional service than we've done, but yet he became attached and he got distracted, and you see eventually he had to take birth again as a deer himself, because that was what he was thinking of at the time of death. But he did receive the mercy of the Lord in that because of his devotional service prior, then the Lord gave him remembrance, so he realized his mistake, and then he took shelter of great devotees. And once again, later on we'll see also he becomes Jad Bharat. So this philosophy of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, sometimes people speculatively come up with parts of it, come up with a little glimpse of part of it. But when we read the Srimad Bhagavatam, as Prabhupada said, there's no comparison, there's no competition. So for people who are actually serious about spiritual life, then when they hear this message, they will understand that. They will realize that what they've been following so far is only partial. Whether it be some philosophical treatise by someone, or whether it be some religious scripture. We're not putting anyone else's religious scripture down, because they do say the same thing, the same message is there: learn how to love God. This is the purpose of Krishna conscious movement, is to develop Prana Pramartha Mahan, is to develop love for Krishna. And in the Bible, that's always saying there, Jesus Christ said, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, mind and soul. And the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam has given us great detail how to do that. How to give up the attachment to this material world, such as attachment to sleeping all the time, attachment to our independent, or attachment to misusing our independence, We think it's going to give us some kind of security. We take some false shelter in misuse of our independence, but actually it creates so much discomfort for us. We find some temporary comfort zone in our distractions in material life, but actually brings such discomfort in a bigger way later on. So devotee, they learn to actually be comfortable in the shelter of the Lord, in the shelter of the Lord's service, in the Lord's holy name, hearing about the Lord. And this is why they become inspired. The more they hear, the more they become inspired. And to the point where the devotion service becomes spontaneous. Until it becomes spontaneous, we have to keep on making an effort to concentrate. When kirtan is on, we have to concentrate. This is worship. Does anybody know that verse in the Kali Yuga? This congregational chanting of the holy name is how the Lord is worshipped. What's that verse? Thank you.
Krishna Varnam Krishna Krishna Sammakangashtra Pashchamyagai Sankirtanaprayaya Janti Sumedishra. In the age of Kali, intelligent people worship the Lord by the process of congregational chanting, and or worship the Lord who is not blackish, and then he's accompanied by his associates and
Confidential companions.
weapons, is it?
Personal weapons, I think.
Personal weapons, yeah. That's considered to be his associates, his personal weapons.
And so basically what Jack was saying there is that the Kali Yuga intelligent persons worship the Lord with congregational chanting of the Lord. So the name of the Lord himself, Krishna Krishna, is not blackish, and he starts this really darn congregational chanting. And Prabhupada said it doesn't matter what religion you are, chant any name of God, any bona fide name of God. So whatever your concept of God is, if you have some bona fide name, you should chant it. They said of all the names, Krishna is the best name. Even amongst the other names like Vishnu and Rama, etc., then Krishna is the best name. Because Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In Godhead, in the spiritual world, there are many personalities. We have Lord Ram, Lord Nrsimhadev, etc. But the topmost planet is known as Goloka Vrindavan, and that is where the most closest pastimes, most intimate pastimes can be experienced with the Lord's devotees and the Lord. Therefore, the name Krishna takes one to the highest realization and to the highest abode. So by the congregational chanting of the holy name, then the spiritual world is manifesting in our temple room, in our homes. So therefore Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Satatam Kirtayantum. Sat means always, eternal, Satchidananda. So it means always chant my name, always chant my glories. So we have to, as when we are worshipping the deities on the altar, we have to be very attentive. We don't worship the deities with our eyes closed. We don't go like, let's just feel the deity and see if we gather in the right place. Our eyes are wide open, physically, even with kirtan, keeping your eyes open so we can see Prabhupada and Guru Puja, we can see Tulsi Devi during Tulsi Arati, we can take the darshan of the Lord. This is purifying us. We're using the eyes to take darshan, using our eyes to purify our heart and mind. When the eyes are shut, that's another comfort zone. The comfort zone should be that we take shelter in the Lord, seeing His form there. It was such a blessing. Just like there was one story when a person was born and bred in Jagannath Puri, and Jagannath Puri for thousands of years has been a place of pilgrimage. And so people would come and say to this person, where's the Jagannath temple? And they say, oh, it's up there. And they say, oh, he says, do you go every day? He says, no, I can go any day I like. So it's just round the corner, I live here, I can go anytime. He says, oh, it must be great living here, you can go to the temple all the time. He says, yeah, I can go anytime I like. But he actually didn't go, but he was thinking, I can go, it's just there, I can see it with my eyes, I can go anytime I like. But he didn't, and eventually he passed away and he hadn't actually even been. So of course that's like us, the deities are here all the time. We could come and see them, either online if we're at home. We can make the effort to be there every day to see the deities. Or if we're in front of the deities, then it's such a great blessing, why we hide away from them. So Krishna is making himself available. He said, here I am in my form of Satchidananda, my form of eternality, knowledge and bliss. So just by, because Krishna is pavitram, we get purified. Any contact with Krishna is purifying. And as with the pure devotee, when we see the pure devotee, like Srila Prabhupada, we see his form, we get purified by seeing that. This is mentioned in the 4th canto, Srimad Bhagavatam, that chanting the name of the devotee is as chanting the holy name of the Lord. The Lord is very happy when we chant the name of the Lord's devotee. And this is also supported that the one who says he is my devotee is not actually my devotee. The one who says he is the devotee of my devotee is actually my devotee. So this way Krishna is establishing parampara, that don't come to me directly. So that doesn't mean to say that we can't look at Krishna directly, we can't pray to him directly. We have a spiritual master, so we're doing it because we're authorized. Spiritual masters telling us to pray to the deities. Prabhupada's given us so much prayers, like when the curtains open, when we chant the Govinda prayers, prayer of the Brahma Samhita, and the hymns of Lord Rama. So we have to take advantage of all the blessings which are there so that we get the best benefit in this human form of life. And this life can be our last one, and we can get out of here. Every day we've got so many blessings there. We've got our japa we can chant, we've got Prabhupada's books to read, we can hear so much from so many other devotees, either here at the temple or online. We can take Charanvita. And if we're at home, then we encourage everybody, if you don't have already, have an altar at home, have a sacred space where you go to that place, and that's where you read, that's where you chant your japa. Some people will seem encouraged that if you don't have such a place at home or it's too difficult, then have a place outside where you go to, which becomes your regular place where you you give your devotions to the Lord there. You can do prayers, your chanting, etc. Could be in your car. The main thing is to have one place where you can go and that becomes sacred. And it's a place where you don't engage in other things. So therefore the temple is a sacred place, and it should be seen as that because we make it sacred by our attention to worshipping the Lord. So therefore, Srila Rupa Goswami has written books to help us in this regard, such as the Nectar of Devotion, where he talks about the various things we should not do before the deity, like sleeping, yawning, passing gas, eating, so many various things we shouldn't be doing in front of the deity, chastising someone, wearing certain colours. So all these things, if we actually follow these things, then we'll find that we start to make advancement and we actually see the deity as the Lord. If we keep making offences, basically what we do is we just keep putting barriers in front of us and more. So sometimes it may be a bit difficult to follow these because we're not accustomed to such high standard of attention. But the more we give attention to this, then we have that knowledge. Sometimes it seems, does anyone ever find that sometimes it seems there's just so many things to remember? Anybody ever find that? You know what helps you remember them? Anybody?
Writing them down.
Writing down is a good thing as well, but sometimes you write so many things, it's like you've got a whole encyclopedia of things you don't even look at, it's like, where do I start with that? It can help.
Chant better so your mind is clean and you can retain the duration and access it without using as well.
Yeah, so that's one way, is attentive chanting. Everybody begins with attentive chanting. So, anything else? Yeah.
Repetition, either you have to repeat it or somebody else has to repeat it for you.
And sometimes somebody else has to repeat it. They get tired of having to repeat it and start getting upset with us. I've told you 100 times. Why are you getting so upset? Because I've already told you 100 times, you're still ignoring me. This is Kali Yuga with terrible memories. And even actually, first thing is we have to want to hear. If you don't want to hear, then there's not much opportunity to remember, or else we just don't want to hear, which means that you can't wake up someone who's pretending to sleep. Repetition is the mother of learning. Prabhupada said that. And then there's another thing that I told you in the
Yeah, I was just looking at the Mahaprabhu's introductions of forgiveness course, and he's talking about you hold on to resentment, then it puts you into the mode of ignorance, and along with the mode of ignorance come a lot of other things apart from resentment, such as forgetfulness, jealousy, bitterness, viciousness towards other living entities. So the more you go sattvic, the more you're illuminated by knowledge, then the more you're able to act on that knowledge as well.
Exactly, that's the one. Once you actually act on it, then, see, when you hear something, you have a choice. Am I going to act on this or am I not going to act on it? When you act on it, then you become aware of it. And then you become aware of it, you keep on acting on it, and then when you stop acting on it, then your conscience might say you should be doing this. But then eventually your conscience stops telling you and then you forget. Or if we, in the beginning, if we choose not to act on it because we think, well, this person's got an axe to grind with me, or this person's picking on me, or something like that, we might choose to have that kind of mentality, but is the instruction good for us? If the person's picking on you, that's their problem. It doesn't have to be our problem. Or if a person doesn't present it in the nicest of ways, that's perhaps their problem, or perhaps because we've just kind of driven them around a twist and they're exasperated who's trying to say the same thing. But the onus is always on us. If we hear an instruction, we have the choice: are we going to follow it, or are we not going to follow it? If you follow it, then you remember it. When you don't follow it, you don't take it on board, then you don't remember it. Of course, sometimes it's difficult to remember so many things, but at least we should try to learn something, especially if it keeps on happening again and again. And especially if someone gives us some instruction as to how it's going to help us or how we can achieve that. So this is actually someone who's been, if someone does that to us, then it means they're being kind to us, because they're giving us the opportunity to rise above the limits of our mind. Everybody wants freedom, isn't it? Does anybody want to be more confined? Does anybody want to have less choice in life, less freedom in life? Unless you're like some kind of a severe kind of masochistic penitent or something like that. But we want more freedom in life. And there's many instructions there which are going to bring us freedom. This is why the regulative principles are known as the regulative principles of freedom. An example is always given that just as in the prison house you follow the rules, you get out soon. You keep on breaking the rules, you keep extending your stay in the prison house. And if someone who's in the prison or who's out of the prison, or who looks like they're going to get out of the prison sooner, or who's got some more favours in the prison, says, yeah, if you just stop doing that and do this, then you win for some favours with the governor, and then you get out sooner. But if we're attached to doing the wrong thing, or attached to just our conception of who we think we are, then we're stuck with that. And then we're stuck with just chewing the chewed. And then from that comes so many limitations, such as frustration, despondency, pride, arrogance. So many negative things come from that. So one thing which Bharat Maharaj here certainly was missing was some association with sadhus who could come along and tell him, Maharaj Bharat, you become, what's happened to you? You become too attached here. You're so advanced and you become so distracted. And we just have to get back on your focus and let that deer go. You're going to have to let it go sometime. Just like we're attached to our body, we're attached to various things in our life, but we're going to have to let them go sometime. We can't take them with us. And we see in ancient kingdoms the extent that some apparently great leaders went to take all their possessions with them. Like the Vikings, they'd have these big ships, and the Viking chiefs, they'd have lots of their possessions put on the boat, and then they set fire to it, and that would send them off with all their goods to the next life. And then some clever person would probably be swimming in the bottom of the lake to get all the gold. And then we see the pyramids. You know, such great booties have been found in those pyramids, and who knows where these people are now, but there's certainly that wealth, they've not taken it with them, it's still there. So such is the bodily concept of life, and such is the deluded ego of living into thinking this is mine, this is my body, this is my domain, this is my place of birth, I relate to this is my family members, these are my friends, etc. And then what happens, we don't take any of it with us when we go. Even sometimes, in ancient times, people would have their servants murdered so that they would be buried with them and go with them to the next life. Such inauspicious mode of ignorance. Imagine not a lot of people were probably applying for a job as a servant of the pharaohs, and, if they knew what was coming. So Maharaj Bharata here is showing us a great lesson. A lesson which we probably have not learned from many, many births, and unless we hear this, we may not again. So it's showing us here that he's still practicing devotion service externally, but internally his mind is somewhere else. So we have to align the mind, which is the internal and the intelligence and the subtlety, with the external, which is the mechanics of what we're doing. Sometimes we get despondent thinking, oh, I just feel so mechanical, there's no taste. That's because our attention is not fixed on what we're doing. We're one place when we should be another place. We're in one place where we should be doing what we're doing, and our mind's thinking of something else we should have done or something we should be doing. Of course, that doesn't mean to say that we don't plan ahead. When I was on the back, I'll just finish with this one thing, questions. So, when I was on the back to program, there's a very brief encapsulation of how to understand the modes of material nature. So the mode of goodness means that first we think and then we act. Mode of passion means, so that's sattvic lifestyle. Mode of passion, rajasic, means we don't think, we just act. And the mode of ignorance means we don't think and we don't act. Or sometimes we think and we don't act, so various levels of that. So if we find ourselves in the lower modes and unable to get out of them, then take association of those who are in the higher modes, and just say Sangha Vise Ranga, as they say in Hindi. By that association you will also become. So just as Maharaj Bharat here, next life he became Maharaj Deer, because his Sangha is the deer. Even though externally he was worshipping Lord, his internal Sangha was the deer, and that's where he took birth again. So we have to, as I say, align our internal with the external. And that requires that we keep on focusing our attention, and that begins with japa. That we keep on focusing our attention. If someone wakes us up in japa or wakes up in class, don't see them as an enemy, see them as a friend. This person is actually taking more care of me than I'm taking of myself, and allowing myself to sink into more ignorance. And someone's taking the trouble, even though I might respond not so nice, they take the trouble to say, hello, tend to wake up, tend to hear the holy name, tend to hear the class. This is going to help you. So you're going to cultivate the Krishna consciousness, so at the end of this life you won't take birth again. And when we take on board that training, then the thing is we should pass it on to others. Not that it's always depending on someone else to wake us up, we should take some steps to wake ourselves up, both physically and spiritually. Otherwise, we just super attached to mode of ignorance, which is actually not going to help us. So the thing is that we all, in Kali Yuga, we're all affected by largely mode of ignorance and good passion. And Krishna consciousness is coming into our life and it's shining a light on the dark areas there, which is illuminating our conditioning and giving, with the knowledge, is giving us the means by which we can become free from that conditioning. So we have to train our mind to see what is good for us, what is to be accepted and what is to be rejected. We have glimpses of intelligence where we accept that Krishna consciousness is the path we should take, and part and parcel of that means that we have to take instructions from others so that we can advance. We're not going to do it on our own. Nobody will do it on their own. Even Maharaj Bharati was such a great devotee, he couldn't do it on his own. And if he had lived in an ashram with some other sages nearby, they'd have been able to help him at that point. As it is, it's all Krishna's arrangement in one sense, because we're seeing here, we're reading this and thinking, that's me. No, I need to actually do something about this before it's too late. Okay, so we'll just stop there. Anyone got any questions or comments? Yes.
What's the comment? What's the question? The comment was Shiva was saying, because you were making the point in class that when until it's spontaneous, we have to try. And Shiva was just giving a Shastakam seminar. He was saying that Srila Prabhupada would offer a cookie to the child, and as the child would take the cookie, Prabhupada would pull it back. And the child would start crying. And he said, but it was never, he said it was very rare that a child would just shrug its shoulders and walk away. So he says, in the same way, Krishna wants us to push toward him to make the effort. So sometimes he'll give a little something, then he'll take it back. And rather than becoming discouraged and giving up, we should realize, okay, this is Krishna's time, I have to push. And then cry, actually. He said we should be feeling separation, so we should be crying, because maybe we've experienced Krishna at times, and when we're not, then we should be crying for Krishna. So that was one. And then the question was, Maharaj Bharat had made advancements, so his heart was softened by praying. Because it was so softened by praying, we can see how much love he had for the deer. And I was just thinking, maybe he had more love for the deer than he had for all the things that he'd given up, his wife and family and the palace and everything else. So is that the danger of the heart becoming soft, is that you can develop affection for something which could actually take you away from Krishna consciousness?
Can be. Yeah, because Prabhupada says that material compassion is the beginning of devotion. So generally in the material world means I, me and mine. That's the centre. We're the centre of the universe. Each and every individual one of us, first and foremost, we put ourselves first. I, me and mine. And as our heart becomes softened, we get to realise actually there are others in this world as well, not just me. It's not all about me. And we realise there's others actually who are less fortunate than me. Let me do something to help them, even if it means putting ourselves out. But at the same time, it's our duty to look after ourselves. A drowning person, they cannot save someone from drowning unless they're a strong swimmer themselves. So we always have to look after ourselves. That selfishness can also be transferred to spiritual life, where we have to look after ourselves. And that means in spiritual life that we keep the program which Prabhupada gave us, which means chanting our rounds as much as possible, chant all our rounds, even before the service of the day starts. If we do that, and we try every morning, we're trying to be more attentive to that japa. Every single morning we're there. We're always thinking, okay, let's maybe chant for half an hour, haven't heard the name, and they start bringing the mind back into focus. And then we don't even know if we're chanting the full mantra, so we should sometimes slow down and just go Hare Krishna, Krishna
Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Just to check that we're actually not skipping a name or so. Huh?
You told me it was Rama Hare Hare.
Can't read. That's also why Just we put the mantra up here when we're chanting japa. And some devotees, Tavi Krishna, he used to chant with the mantra card wherever he went. If he'd left his cap, he'd read it again. When he was chanting, he was always reading the mantra when he was chanting. And so, reading the mantra is assisting us to chant the mantra fully. Seeing the Lord in these pictures, it's also engaging the Lord. Jampatak Maharaj was recently talking about how these various things, like if you're in the temple chanting your japa, or you're at home and you've got an altar chanting your japa, you can look and hear the holy name, touching your beads, and so all these senses being engaged in that's complete Krishna consciousness. So it's better if we're chanting japa and eyes are closed, there's more chance we fall asleep and we won't even notice it. And someone will try to wake us up and we'll get upset thinking, I wasn't sleeping. If we weren't sleeping, we would get upset. No need for that. So it means you may not be sleeping, but you're certainly more awake. So there's less chance of falling asleep if we keep our eyes open, because as soon as your eyes start to close, you know you're getting tired. If your eyes are already closed, you wouldn't notice it. And somebody else will have to notice it. So why disturb someone else's japa? They have to keep on waking us up all the time. And we should wake ourselves up. No, it's not as if it's something new we're doing it many times. So chanting attentive chanting, that's where it begins with. And then from there we become attentive to the other things, like attentive to hearing class, attentive to hearing instructions, because we want to. So it's all based on our desire, really. If we want to, then it will improve and it will improve as keep on desiring. If we realise we don't have much desire, then pray for that desire.
So in the case of Maharaj Bharat, he become more susceptible to being attached. I just wonder how that works, because you'd think if you make an advancement, then you'd be stronger at resisting temptation. But he fell for a hook, line. Of course, you could say it was pastime, but also it's to illustrate. So I just wonder what the dynamic that's being illustrated there, that as you go on, it becomes narrower and you have to be more careful.
Different tracks along the way. And that's why, however far along the way we are, we should never give up the association of devotees. This is called the mad elephant offence, to give up the association of devotees. Prabhupada mentions that in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So sometimes it's described differently, but this is one way it's been described, to give up the association of devotees. Because we may not realise that we become distracted by Maya, but someone else comes in and says, yeah, it's a fact. This is, you're going the wrong way there. And it shows you, it's also mentioned in Nectar Devotion that the devotee never feels safe until he's actually situated at the lotus feet of the Lord back in the spiritual world. So this is an example that the Lord is showing us that even if you're on preliminary stages of love of God, then still you can fall back into material attachment again. So it may well have been that out of compassion when he's seen the living entity there, and then he thought that this living entity is going to perish, it's going to get eaten alive, so that we feed it. But then, like Jagannath was mentioned the other day, the thing he should have done was then teach how to fend for itself and let it go. Mm-hmm. You see people nowadays, they have kind of animal sanctuaries, and sometimes what they do is they teach the animal's injured or it finds itself stranded without any parent. Then they nurse it, and then they train it to look after itself, and then they let it go. So this is ideally what he should have done if he was thinking to do some welfare. But what happened was he became very much concerned for his welfare physically, and forgot about his own welfare, and forgot that even in due course of time, either he's going to pass away, and then the thing won't be able to look after himself neither. So this is what happens when we lose our sense of discrimination by taking shelter in material energy. Then we begin to lose our sense of discrimination. Even great Prabhupada says in Bhagavatam, first canto, that even great stalwart victims, stalwart devotees fall victim to wealth and women, or it could be whatever your attachments may be. Even sometimes people leave the temple to play video games.
You were mentioning in the class about taking instruction and kind of avoiding frustration and stuff. And I was just reading yesterday, interdependence only takes place amongst members of people who are independent. So the onus on everyone is to start standing on their own 2 feet. And then when that happens, then interdependence can start to take place. So that's a wonderful dynamic of synergy, which we should have access to living in community. We have to bring all the members up to the point of being independent, where they can. Well, he uses the expression in the 7 Habits. They own themselves. It means they take full responsibility for themselves, and then we can go to the next stage, which is interdependence.
So that's a good point. Neither being too dependent nor being too independent is healthy for ourselves or for a spiritual organization. The interdependent means that we're all working together as a team. As I say, there's no me in team, there's no I in team. So interdependent means, just like the body, each part of the body is interdependent for the whole thing to function properly. It's not that one thing is not required, so we just get rid of it. The sutures of the legs of the body, you think, well, the sutures are just quite a waste of time, just cut them off. And it's kind of foolish, you know, if the puffed up Brahmins think we're in charge of everybody and we're the intelligent class. Well, it's not very intelligent to not be humble, because the Brahmin's supposed to also be humble. So interdependence is actually the success. Working together, not working independently, not being over-dependent, but taking full responsibility and being accountable as well. Sometimes people, in the name of independently thoughtful, just want to be independent and create chaos with that. But interdependence means there is a system of authorization which we're all a part of. It's not that, for example, at the moment I'm serving as Temple President, it's not that I'm completely independent. I'm answerable and accountable. I've got my duties. And the Temple Commander, he's got his duties. He's not independent. He has got a certain amount of freedom to choose within that. We all have a certain amount of freedom. And the more you use your freedom in Krishna's service, the more freedom you get given.
You said there's different stages of independence. The first stage is the obnoxious stage. And the obnoxious stage is where you have courage. That's why they asked her, and then they goes, when do you know when someone's ready for second initiation? He said, when he tells the Temple President to take a hike. So that's when you know he's ready for a second. So that's the obnoxious stage, and he's got some courage. But then the mature stage is consideration. It starts to come in. You know, when consideration starts to come, you start to think of, you start putting others before yourself, you know.
Well, you see that sometimes if someone's too much in mode of ignorance, and then you can try to encourage them out of mode of ignorance. What happens is they do get in mode of ignorance, they get in mode of passion, where they start snapping back. So you think, well, that's not very nice, you're biting the hand that feeds you. But at least they're out of the mode of ignorance. Now they're awake, they can start committing offences, and then you have to realise how to stay awake without committing offences.
At that point, you're talking about interdependence as well. The word sangha comes from anga, which means limb. So sangha, when we come together as a sangha, we come together as a body. So you can't have like somebody just twitching on the body without being a disturbance to everybody else. You know, everybody has to be harmonious in a sangha.
That's true. Sometimes what happens in anga becomes poisonous. You have to cut it off to save the rest of the body, using that analogy, or it may become infected. So we want to make ourselves a useful anga. I'll just finish with this one thing. Actually, one time I was doing Sankirtan, and I had just been initiated. First initiated, this was back in '86, I think it was. And I was in Sankirtan, and I spent a long time speaking to this person actually wasn't interested. And the Sanctum leader, my authority at the time, come over and chastised me, says, this is not your time, now that you're initiated, it's your spiritual master's time you're on. He said, you're wasting his time, you're supposed to get here representing. Okay, so remember, this Krishna is giving us this time, and it's our spiritual master's time. Let's use it wisely, get the best benefit of the human form of life. It's one we will be. Prabhupada ki, Prabhupada ki, Prabhupada ki,
Jai.
Jai.